Owning a fast food chain sounds like the closest thing to a guaranteed fortune. A brand people already trust, a menu already tested, a system already proven. You just open the doors and the money follows. That is the dream you were sold. But behind the golden arches, the buckets of chicken, and the flame-grilled logos sits one of the most brutal financial structures in modern business. So what does owning a fast food chain actually look like once the marketing stops? Start with the word owning, because in almost every case, you are not owning a fast food chain. You are renting one. You are buying a franchise, which means you are buying permission. Permission to use a name. Permission to use a system. Permission to operate inside someone else's blueprint for a price, for a limited number of years, with rules attached to almost every decision you make. The company that owns the brand is called a franchisor. You're the franchisee. And the relationship between those two roles is where the real economics of fast food live. Before you make a single sale, you pay to get in. This is called the franchise fee, and for a major chain, it typically runs between $20,000 and $50,000 just for the right to open one location. That fee does not build your restaurant. It does not buy equipment. It does not pay staff. It buys you a license and access to training. Then comes the real number. Total startup investment for a fast food location, once you include construction, kitchen equipment, signage, initial inventory, and working capital, typically lands somewhere between $700,000 and $2.3 million, depending on the brand and the real estate market. Think about that gap for a second. The fee that gets you in the door might be $50,000. The total cost to actually open might be 40 times that. Most people never separate those two numbers in their head, and that gap is exactly where first-time franchisees get financially blindsided. Where does that money go? Roughly a third goes to construction and build-out, because most franchisors require a specific building design, specific finishes, and specific equipment brands, all chosen by corporate, not by you. Another third goes to equipment: fryers, grills, walk-in coolers, point-of-sale systems, drive-through technology, all of it specified down to the model number in the franchise agreement. The rest covers signage, initial food and paper inventory, permits, insurance, and a required reserve of working capital, because almost every franchisor insists you hold enough cash to survive several months of operating losses before the location breaks even. Here is a number that surprises almost everyone. The economist Timothy Bates, who has spent decades studying small business survival, found that franchise businesses do not actually fail less often than independent ones. In several of his studies, franchise failure rates were statistically similar to, and in some cases higher than, independent business failure rates, despite the perception that a known brand equals safety. Why would that be true? Because a franchise does not remove risk. It relocates risk. The franchisor's risk goes down because they collect fees whether your location thrives or not. Your risk goes up because you're the one carrying the debt, the lease, and the labor costs. Now look at what you owe after opening, because the payments do not stop at the franchise fee. Every month, you pay a royalty fee to the franchisor, typically 4 to 6% of your gross sales, not your profit, your total revenue, paid whether you made money that month or not. On top of that comes a marketing fee, usually 2 to 5% of gross sales, which funds the national advertising campaigns you see on television. You're paying for commercials for a brand you already licensed, and you have almost no say in how that marketing budget gets spent. Ad rent, which in fast food is often structured as a percentage of sales rather than a flat number, meaning the better your location performs, the more your landlord and often your franchisor benefit alongside you. Then ad labor. The restaurant consultant Aaron Allen, who has advised chains across the globe, has pointed out that labor costs in quick-service restaurants typically run between 25 and 35% of revenue. And that number has been climbing for over a decade as minimum wage laws rise in city after city. Add food and paper costs, usually another 28 to 32% of revenue. Add utilities, insurance, maintenance contracts, and equipment leasing. Stack all of it together: royalty, marketing fee, rent, labor, food cost, overhead, and you start to see the real picture. Before a single dollar reaches you, as the owner, somewhere between 85 and 95 cents of every revenue dollar is already spoken for. Consider a single location doing $2 million in annual sales, which is a realistic number for a well-placed fast food unit today. Royalty and marketing fees alone might take $180,000 off the top. Labor might take another $550,000. Food costs might take another $580,000. Rent, utilities, insurance, and maintenance might take another $300,000. Add it up, and you are left with roughly $390,000 before debt service. Now subtract the loan payment on that $1 to $2 million startup investment, and many owners are left with a net profit margin in the single digits, often between 3 and 6% of gross sales. 3 to 6%. On $2 million in sales, that is $60,000 to $120,000 a year for a business that likely required a personal investment north of $500,000 and years of 80-hour work weeks to get open. Does that sound like the fortune the commercials implied? It helps to understand how this system came to exist in the first place. Ray Kroc did not invent the hamburger. He did not even invent McDonald's. He discovered a single, highly efficient restaurant run by Richard and Maurice McDonald in San Bernardino, and he saw something most people missed. The real money was not in selling burgers. It was in selling the system for making burgers over and over to other people willing to pay for the blueprint. That single insight became the foundation of the modern franchise model, and it changed the entire structure of American business ownership. By the 1960s, franchising had exploded, not because burgers were suddenly more profitable, but because a franchisor could scale a brand nationwide using other people's capital, other people's labor, and other people's risk tolerance, while collecting a percentage from every location. Harlan Sanders followed a similar path with Kentucky Fried Chicken. Franchising his fried chicken recipe rather than opening thousands of company-owned stores himself. The pattern repeated across the industry for one simple reason. Franchising let a brand grow faster than its own bank account ever could by turning ambitious individuals into the funding source. This is the part almost nobody explains clearly. In a franchise system, the franchisor's incentive is unit growth. More locations means more franchise fees, more royalty income, more market presence. Whether any single location is comfortably profitable for its owner is a secondary concern, because the franchisor's revenue is protected either way. That misalignment creates the first hidden trap: market saturation. Franchisors are financially motivated to keep approving new locations, sometimes clustering them close enough together that they cannibalize each other's sales. Patrick Hoffman, a franchise researcher who has published extensively on franchisee-franchisor relationships, has written about exactly this tension, noting that franchise agreements are structured in ways that can favor system-wide expansion over individual unit profitability. You might sign a contract believing your location has an exclusive radius protecting your customer base. Read the fine print carefully, because many agreements offer far weaker territorial protection than franchisees assume, and a new location can appear closer than expected, splitting the same customer pool 2 or 3 ways. The second hidden trap is mandatory renovation. Most franchise agreements require you to remodel your location every 7 to 10 years, at your own cost, often running into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, simply to keep the brand looking current. You do not get to opt out. The agreement usually gives the franchisor the right to terminate your license if you refuse. This means the moment you finally pay down your original construction loan, a new forced expense often arrives right on schedule, resetting your debt load just as you were starting to feel ahead. Susan Kezios, who founded the American Franchisee Association specifically to advocate for franchisee rights, has spent years highlighting how one-sided many franchise agreements are, with contract terms overwhelmingly favoring the franchisor's ability to enforce standards, terminate agreements, and require reinvestment, while offering franchisees comparatively little negotiating power. Now compare two real paths inside the same industry. A single-unit franchisee who owns one location is exposed to every one of these pressures directly: rising labor costs, mandatory renovations, royalty payments, and a fragile margin, all riding on the performance of one building in one location. A multi-unit operator, someone who owns 10, 20, or 50 locations of the same brand, experiences a completely different business. Fixed costs like management systems, accounting, and supply chain relationships get spread across many units. A slow month at one location gets absorbed by strong months at others. Multi-unit operators can negotiate better lease terms, better supplier pricing, and sometimes even reduced royalty rates, because the franchisor values a large, reliable operator far more than a single independent owner. This is why so much of the real profit in fast food franchising does not go to first-time single-location owners. It goes to a smaller group of experienced multi-unit operators who treated their first location as a proof of concept, then scaled aggressively once they understood exactly where the margin lived. The Franchise Industry Association reports that a significant share of new locations opening in mature systems today go to existing multi-unit operators rather than first-time franchisees, a trend that has been building for years as the economics of scale become harder to ignore. So where does that leave the person considering a single fast food location today? The honest answer is that success now depends less on the brand name and almost entirely on execution. Site selection, labor management, drive-through speed, and cost control run with a discipline most people underestimate before they sign. Robert Justice, whose academic research on franchise management shaped how business schools teach the subject, has long emphasized that franchisee success correlates far more strongly with the operator's own management skill than with the franchise brand itself. The name on the sign gets people through the door once. Whether they come back and whether the location survives the next lease renewal depends on the owner's daily decisions. Eventually, most owners think about the exit, selling the location once it is stable and profitable. This is often described as the real payoff of franchise ownership. And for operators who scale to multiple units, it can be true. A profitable, well-run multi-unit territory can sell for a meaningful multiple of its annual cash flow, sometimes to another operator, sometimes back to the corporation itself if it chooses to convert franchise locations into company-owned ones. But for a single location owner, the exit math is far less generous. Selling one restaurant with thin margins and years remaining on a lease often returns only a modest amount above what was originally invested, after accounting for the debt still owed and the renovation obligations the next buyer will need to factor into their offer. None of this means fast food ownership is a bad decision for everyone. It means the decision is far more complicated than the commercials, the franchise expos, and the glossy brochures suggest. It rewards operators who understand the real structure: thin single-unit margins, forced reinvestment cycles, and an incentive system where the franchisor grows regardless of how any one owner performs. It punishes anyone who mistakes a trusted logo for a guaranteed return, because the brand was never the business. The system was always the business, and the system was built to work best for the people who understood how to scale inside it, not the people who simply bought a single ticket to ride it. Owning a fast food chain sounds like the closest thing to a guaranteed fortune. Now you know what it actually is: a high-cost, thin-margin operating agreement where the real fortune belongs to whoever understood the difference between running one location and controlling many.